Welcome to Life in LA, a look at people and places in Lower Arkansas, our LA. Lower Arkansas is made up of the 15 southernmost counties in the state. Join us each week as we talk to some of the people who make this part of the world such an interesting place to live. And now, let's join Life in LA with our host, Steve Ford.
Well, my guest today is one who needs no introduction. He was described in an article in Magnolia Reporter as a person who was hyperactively involved in his community. He served as president of the Chamber of Commerce, the Magnolia Economic Development Commission, the County Emergency Planning Commission, president of Rotary Club, chairman of the Magnolia Housing Authority. At Central Baptist Church, he was a deacon, choir member, Sunday school teacher, and served on about every committee that there was. And you will recognize the voice right off. I'm pleased to introduce a man who needs no introduction, but whom I'm most of all happy to introduce as my friend, Ken Sibley. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Very much.
I can't believe it's been 10 years since you retired from KVMA. How are things going for you up there in Memphis?
Doing well. We're here in Collierville, Tennessee. We're on the far east side of Memphis. We moved up here to be near the younger grandchildren.
Oh.
And we go out to Dallas and see Susan and Stephen a couple times a year, and then they come in here. They were here just recently, and we're doing wonderful. We're glad we retired. I missed the radio business, but I'm telling you what, it was a wonderful ride through those years.
Oh, I bet it was. I bet it was. So just give us a rundown on your family. You're married to Carol Cooper Sibley.
That's right. Her dad had a Texaco station at the corner on East Main right there, East Main and Verta.
Some of us bought gas there.
I did, too. I could buy gas for 29 cents a gallon back when I was in college and had a Volkswagen, and it would really do well.
And you two have two daughters? and
Two daughters. Shannon that lives here. She's married to Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
They have three girls, and Susan and Stephen live in McKinney, Texas. They have Anna and Coleman. He is a junior at Texas Tech.
Wow.
Lubbock, Texas.
Those kids are growing up. Of course, as you said, you moved up to Collierville to be closer to Shannon's kids. You had the chance to help raise Susan's and Stephen's, and they were right there here in town with you. That was a blessing to have grandchildren nearby. I guess you still get to see Susan and Stephen.
We do. They were in town here not long ago, and had Coleman with them, and we got to see him, and everything was just wonderful. But Magnolia will always be our home, but we are at home here, too. So we have friends and the neighborhood that we live in, and we really enjoy it.
Well, that's great. I knew you would settle wherever you'd settle well wherever you settled. There were many of us who thought, well, Ken will never leave Magnolia, but it did happen, didn't it?
That's right.
Moved out of Lower Arkansas and lived to tell about it. You and I have been friends as long as I can remember. We went to church together. We even taught Sunday school together. And man, some of the stories we could tell about that. but we'll have to save those for another time. We can't chase that rabbit. You remember
Absolutely.
That time in Sunday school when no, we can't go down that.
Absolutely. I still remember it.
Yeah. So I guess you wanted to work in radio as long as you can remember. That was your plan early on, to be in radio?
Yeah, I talked to my dad. He after I was graduate from college, my dad asked me, says, well, what do you want to do? He could have got me in the oil business, but I'm glad I didn't get in the oil business because it cratered not too long after that. But I got into radio because I was there part-time. I got started at KVMA running the offset press because they didn't have any on-air talent available at that time. And I did that for a while, and I succeeded Jack Daugherty doing that.
Oh.
And then I got into the radio business and went on from there, and then Bill Bigley offered me when I graduated from college. Carol had a job teaching, replacing Ruth Couch over at the high school, and then at the junior high. And then I had opportunity. Mr. Bigley asked me if I'd like to stay on, how much it'd take for me to be on full time, and I told him, and he accepted that. And then we went on from there.
Hmm. So Bill Bigley was your first boss then.
Bill Bigley was the first boss, and when I worked part-time and then when I worked full-time, he asked me in full-time, and then it was a wonderful relationship through the years with him, and we had a good time doing the radio. Back when the radio was really important to the community because you didn't have internet, you didn't have everything, all the news jumping out everywhere. We were a member of Mutual Broadcasting, which gave us national news, and then they had the Arkansas Radio Network that was state news, and then we had local news that was Magnolia.
Oh yeah, I worked with you there at KVMA, late 70s, maybe to the early 80s, just a few years. But that was towards the end of the heyday of radio. People got up in the morning and switched on the radio to hear the weather and to hear like you said, the news and the latest school menus. That was really the only place. And I think you had mentioned one of the most popular programs was the hospital calling, where you actually you actually read, and newspaper used to publish who was admitted and who was. We used to call it a list of all the admissions and discharges from the hospital.
And the new births.
And the new births, right.
But then the government got involved in that situation and shut all that down. Mm-hmm. Now the preachers can't even go down there and look at the list.
I know. It's the HIPAA laws.
It's a total new day.
It certainly
Plus,
is.
we had the Finley show back in the day. That's what I started doing. It was a swap shop of the air, and it went on for years and years and years. The internet pretty well put that out of business.
Oh,
but,
right.
It was a lot of fun. We never knew what you was going to get called on the Finley show.
Could you share some of those more entertaining phone calls, or maybe some of them?
I tell you what, Mr. Yowell had the Tasty Freeze. He would always ask me at church, did Jesse James Newton ever sell that genuine Hawaiian Western guitar?
The one I always wondered about. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Did he sell it? No. He never sold it.
Never sold, as far as I know. Steve and I think you and I put in some money to try to help out and do that situation at one time. So.
Oh yeah, the one that I always worried about was that lady that had that big bag of clothes.
Yeah, that's the one we went in on right there.
Yeah,
we're going to get that off the air.
It was a never-ending bag. She always had a big bag of used clothes, called in nearly every day. Because I had a good buddy, James Calhoun, that he carried a transistor radio in his pocket, and you could set the time. He had that radio on for the Friendly Show, and he bought and sold himself. There was another one. Lady that had a one-man bed.
Right, one-man bed.
And the announcers had to be kind of careful. They didn't want to get some of the callers could be a little testy, couldn't they?
Absolutely. Finally, Bill Bigley put in a 7-second delay unit, so you could dump some of those things that ever came on there. But
oh yeah,
it was a good program for years and years and years.
Programs were one of the things when radio first came along in the 20s. They had all these neat drama. Of course, KVMA. Do you remember offhand when they began broadcasting?
They were on the air in 1948. And they were in the transmitter building out by the college. Mm-hmm. And their rent out there was every hour on the hour you had to say, this is KVMA, the home of Southern State College, or what now Southern Arkansas University.
Oh, yeah.
But, we had all that. I remember one time Dr. Atterbury was head out there, and he called me. He said, Ken, you might want to come look at the tower. One of the guys, bush hogging, hit one of the guy wires the other day.
Oh, man.
And I said, I'll go right now.
Yeah.
So I got out there, and I could see it, and the top 100 foot was leaning to the left. And I could see the FM cable going up, and I was hoping it wasn't broken. Mm-hmm. So I called the radio, and they got somebody over here from the tower company that used the tractor at the college and re-plumbed the thing up, and then came out and re-welded it all back together.
They didn't have
next day.
They didn't have to climb the tower at that point.
No, they didn't have to climb. They just straightened it all back up, and then the next day they came and trued everything up and put the guy wires. And the guy said that if it had been a new installation, that thing had been on the ground because they were so tight. They would have been so tight they just slung it.
Wow.
But
Wow.
certainly glad that didn't happen.
Yeah, of course, the tower did go down one time.
It did. A tornado, the only tornado that I ever tracked in Magnolia, Arkansas, was that picked up the top of that tower with Gil Curtis standing on the back steps of the transmitter building.
Had a witness out there.
Took it out and set it down, and it just folded up.
Mm.
And Miss Iru Daugherty, called me and said, the tower's down. I said, well, I'll head out there. She said, no, I mean it's on the ground. So I drove out there, and I still have a picture, and shows my Volkswagen me out there, and I called Carol later and told her, I said, we better get ready for unemployment.
Mm-hmm. We're not going to be on the air for a while.
I'm going to be on the air for a while, but Gil Curtis knew how to have the AP&L come out and string a horizontal antenna wire strung out there across that for the AM, and we covered 80% of the area the next day.
Wow.
FM was out for a little while until we got that back up, and I had to call, and the utility tower sent a new tower in. It was supposed to go to somebody else, but they said they were just replacing one. You're down, so we'll send it to you.
Yeah.
So they came out and put it back up. We got the FM back up, and everything else was good.
There's always technical difficulties that you got to work on, keep the transmitter working, all that. Do you remember that time there was a tube that went out? It wasn't one you could just pick up at Radio Shack. You and I went down to the airport in Shreveport. We were going to pick that tube up from, they had a air freight section, didn't they?
Yeah, sure did.
And
we went down there and going to get that, and they said they closed. And the only reason they were there was the body was coming in.
They closed because you and I decided we'd stop at Ralph and Kaku's or someplace. And it ran us about 30 minutes late. We got there, and some guy was pulling the door shut. And he said, oh, we're closed. And he said, the only reason I'm here is we had some human remains that came in, and I have to stay here until they're claimed. We thought, man, that would be our human remains if we had to call Mr. Bigley and tell him.
We didn't get the tube.
But we got the tube, got it back, and got it installed. Mr. Bigley was my most unforgettable character, I guess you could say. He was a character, wasn't he?
He was. He came from Chicago down to here, and he worked with Durwood Kirby and a bunch of the guys on the radio dramas back in the day on network radio. And he knew all those kind of things, but he loved. He was not the original general manager. He was assistant manager, but then later became the general manager and then the owner and went on down from there. Dr. John Wilson, who was my physical doctor, he was on the board and everything else, and he's the one that really opened up stock, being able to, for Mr. Bigley, able to give out to employees for different things.
Oh, yeah.
So that opened up a whole new era in the broadcasting business.
Yeah. He also did billboards, didn't he?
He did. He had Gaston Cannon had one of those little motorcycle things with ladders hanging all over the side of it, like a postman used to use.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that name.
Now you got all digital billboards everywhere. You can program them right from your house and do them up like that. So
yeah,
they're doing a lot better. They're everywhere, up here and down there and everywhere else.
You know, I applied to work at the radio station. I'd been working over at the Banner News, and I thought, no, this would be a good chance. They had an opening for a radio salesperson. Bill Merrill had passed away. You worked with Bill a long time.
I worked with Bill. He came from Texarkana. He was a wonderful guy.
Super nice guy.
A super nice guy. Got killed on East North there in Magnolia, just crossing away. He dropped Kelly off at school, and he went by and a truck hit him and killed him graveyard dead. You couldn't even tell there was a thing on him.
Well, I saw that
he was a great guy.
I saw there was an opening for a radio sales position, so I went over and Mr. Bigley interviewed me, and a couple of weeks later, I was taking a shower and the phone rings and Sharon answers it, and it's Mr. Bigley, and she said, well, he's in the shower. He said, well, tell him he's got the job. And that was my introduction. But then he said, oh, by the way, you'll be on the air from 6 to 9 a.m. I thought, I did not apply for that position. I was going to sell radio advertising because I figured out the money was in sales, not in production so much. But he said, he explained it this way. He said, you'll be on the air and everybody will know you when you walk into their place of business. And he was right about that. People knew you.
He was.
They may not know what you look like. The article I read about you met a lady and introduced yourself, and she said, "No, you can't be Ken Sibley. He's a small man." We get an idea of what someone looks like by their voice, don't we?
That's right. And then I went over to Farmers Bank one time to see Dean Reagan. And he didn't loan a lot of money back then. And somebody told me I couldn't ever get anything. But I went over there and I said, "I'm Ken Sibley." He said, "I know who you are. And I know you work at the radio station." Me and Caroline borrowed a few $1,000s to buy a car at Bobby Henson Ford down there. And he said, "Well, I can tell you right now exactly where your coverage area is where our customers come from."
Is that right?
So, and that was where everybody in the whole area listened to radio. And we really, KVMA at 6:30 on the dial was an anomaly because Wilbur Mills was in Congress in Washington, D.C. when they got the rifles. And he got a 6:30 frequency. The lower you are on the dial, the taller the antenna. The higher you are, the lower the antenna. So we covered a good area in Magnolia and Columbia County and Ouachita County and all those areas right there. So it was a good thing to have at 6:30 dial.
Had the good coverage. Yeah, I used to go to Stamps. Gladys Martin Oglesby had a program at 8 o'clock. I sold advertising there. Stevens had a program with, what was the lady's name?
Margie Wagner.
Margie Wagner. And she had a short program. I think you sold the advertising for that. What was that department store up there in Stevens?
CV's department store.
CV's department store, yeah.
Yep, and had John Marvin Davis at Stevens Hardware.
Oh, some good advertisers out in the community.
Some good advertisers up there.
People out in the surrounding communities relied on the news and the programming. And well, speaking of programming, let's go back and talk about some of the programs. We talked about the locals. We talked about the Friendly Show. There was another program that came on just before lunch, and a famous lady from Magnolia was the hostess on that.
Mary Kay Wyrick.
Mary Kay Wyrick. We could spend the rest of the time talking about, what was the name of her program?
The Mary Kay Show.
The Mary Kay Show.
She had a lady that, who was she? I can't remember what her name was. She came in and substituted for her occasionally. Sounded just like Mary Kay.
Oh, really? Huh.
But one day I always recorded the news during her program, and I was in the production room doing the news, and Miss Daugherty called back there, and she came back there and stopped me. She said, "She left." I said, "Who?" The lady doing the program for Ms. Mary Kay. And I said, "Well, she came back." She did. So I went back and listened. She just walked across the room. You could hear her walking. The door slammed the door, and the air conditioner running.
And she's gone.
I said, she was gone, and I'm telling you what. But she had the most. If she wanted a bushel of purple hull peas, she could have it and snap your finger.
Wow!
And so she was well known throughout the area.
Just drop that in the program, and they would appear at the door, huh?
They would appear at the door. That's exactly right.
Wow! That there was the main broadcast studio, but then there was that little adjacent room where the guest speakers would come in, and that's where Mary Kay. But then in the later days, she broadcast from her home.
Right. That was number one, they built that studio right at catty corner from Central Baptist Church down there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I started. It had a magnolia blossom in the floor, the control, the studio. Used to have a Hammond organ and a grand piano. And they did live music and things in there as well.
I remember as a kid going there on Saturdays to hear some kind of a children's program, story hour.
A children's program that had that.
Yeah.
Ralph Johnson was there for a long, long time. He was like an assistant manager. Then we went down to Tyler, Texas, somewhere down in there, and that's when they hired Bill Merrill to come in.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Bill came in and was doing a wonderful job. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that first building,
something that was really good.
It really was. That first building right there by that Central Baptist, those squatty square building built just for radio, and from there you all moved over on South Jackson Street.
Right. They bought that building over there, the old securities building. It was an old hotel with a livery stable back in the day.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then he said he bought it and moved us over there because we were running out of room at KVMA because of the FM and a lot of different things, and we had done away with Associated Press. We used to have Associated Press wire in the back. We'd rip and read the news, all the worldwide news from there, what the Mutual didn't cover. And but we moved over there, and everything was just really good. And later we sold that building when we sold to Bill Nolan in El Dorado, and made 26 stations he owned. And he was just a gem of a guy to work for, and we really did enjoy our time with him as well.
You know,
Bill Bigley was the man who started everything in Magnolia, really get it going.
Right. When you and I worked together, we would get there, we'd start broadcasting at 6 a.m., and you had to get there a little before that to rip the news that you were going to read off the teletype that sat out there in the hallway, and then you go in there and fire up the transmitter right at 6 a.m. most days. Now, sometimes you could oversleep. You needed to be on the air, though. And we'd get in there and read the news. I can't remember exactly how that morning program went. I remember to this day, though, the first day that I worked with you, and we each had a mic, and we read the news together, and just doing the programming. And then we got to kind of a dead time, and you turned to me and said, "All right, we're going to talk now." And you put your hand behind my chair and pushed me up to the mic. And I said, "What are we going to talk about?" Because I had been a writer, I like to have it all written out. And you say, "Oh, we'll think of something." And that's kind of radio too, isn't it? There's some spontaneity to it, and you have to be able to fill dead air. And that was a challenge for me at first. What can you think about? But it became easier, and it was certainly fun doing that, going through the broadcast. We'd start with the news and sports, and the county agent had a program about 6:25. It was pre-recorded. We've had, I don't know how many county agents you worked with through the years.
Yeah, I worked with a bunch of them back in the days, and Charles Atterbury and a whole group of guys that came through there, and they did their little programs and went on from there. But it was just a lot of fun because we were part of the community.
Oh, right.
And the community listened. And like you said, you could be known by anybody in the world. You just walk in there and tell them who you are, and I know who you are.
I remember one time driving out by the college at that duck pond, and some art students had put some kind of modern art in it. And on the program that morning, I'd seen it, and I said, "Ken, you ought to see what's out there in that pond." And you said, well, what is it? And I said, "Well, I don't even know that I could describe it." And we just left it at that. They said, somebody told me later, said, "You should have seen the stream of traffic that came by that pond all day." People wanting to see, well, what in the world is out there? I don't think people realize. I would imagine 80 or 85% of the people in this area got up and turned on the radio and listened to it, especially if weather like we had last week. Are we going to have school? What's the weather forecast? And of course, it paid for itself through the advertising. I was reading some in that article about the golden age of radio, that radio really set the standard for what TV did and became. And they sold the first advertising. The first advertising jingle was on radio, of course. KVMA's had some famous ads through the years. The one I remember the most was an ad I did for, it had been on the air forever. I picked it up and ran it for Magnolia Insurance. "The fire alarm has sounded in Magnolia." We put that on, and then we'd give we'd say, "We'll be back with the location of that fire in just a moment." And people were kind of programmed to switch on that radio.
When you listen to that religiously.
Yeah.
That hospital calling, when the thing killed that one, because everybody listened to that one too, who've been admitted and discharged from the hospital, new babies and things like that as well.
Right, they wanted to know.
Fire alarm. The other one was, even when I came there, Mr. Bigley had sold that to Broadway Plumbing.
Broadway Plumbing, I remember.
Talk about all your friendly from Broadway and all this stuff, and he just laughed.
Oh, you had a laugh track running behind it, didn't he?
Had a laugh track behind it, call you from Broadway.
Yeah.
I thought that was the most stupid ad I've ever heard, but Mr. Broadway and them wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah.
He said, works.
People got up and called Broadway plumbing, didn't they? Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. The other thing I remember about programming, when we were growing up, we'd get up in the morning on Sunday morning as we were getting ready to go to church, and my dad would switch the radio on, and some of the Christian music at the day would be playing. It was always some Southern gospel or something playing, and Jubilee, we're invited to a country jubilee. Do you remember that one?
Right, remember that one?
Yeah.
We also had the Mysterious Five Gospel Singers, a bunch of those coming in.
A lot of them came through the studio there, didn't they?
They came in the studio and did that. I used to work some Sunday mornings, and they would come in the studio. I remember when Elder Murphy first came in, and while he was preaching and talking, Sister Murphy would be speaking in tongues. And the guys waiting to come on the air would be out in Iru's office out there, the front office, and they'd look in and see her doing that, and her eyes would get real big.
Oh, man.
Scare them to death.
Who's going to follow that? Yeah.
Elder Murphy did call one time. They called me at home and said, do we accept a collect phone call from Jerusalem? I said, Israel? They said, yes, Elder Murphy wants to do his program. I said, well, he'll have to pay for the call, but we can't pay for a call from Jerusalem. So he wound up not doing that. And then, bless his heart, he later died in the wrong doctor's office in Little Rock.
Oh.
He was in the wrong one, but he was a nice guy as well.
Yeah, yeah. I know KVMA started out as an AM station to begin with. It wasn't until, I believe, the early 60s that the FCC licensed FM. And FM, the inventor of AM was tasked with coming up with something that had less static, and he came up with FM, but RCA didn't want to put it out because it would have required revamping everything. But in the early 60s, then FM stations began to catch on, and somehow I guess KVMA acquired an FM broadcasting license.
That's right. Bill Bigley was talking to the stockholders of Magnolia Broadcasting, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Rushton, and that bunch, and they weren't interested in FM at all. So Bigley put that on 100% himself, and he owned all of it. And so he got it going, and it went well, and then it just really took off.
It really finally supplanted the AM station, didn't it? Took over.
Right.
But before it found its niche, it had just about every kind of programming known to man.
I'll tell you what, we had done everything on that program to do that. Contemporary music, gospel music, Christian music.
Disco. It was disco for a while.
Disco. And so we finally settled on a lot of things, but it finally took off and really worked well. Yeah.
It's a good, crisp, clear sound. And when he acquired it, that was a powerful signal.
It was like 50,000 watts. He could have gone 100,000 if he'd have gone up on the antenna, but he wasn't interested in covering over the counties just around us. He didn't want to spend all that extra money to go up another 1,000 foot on the tower.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah. I think
that would cost a fortune.
I think a station in Shreveport eventually acquired that license, didn't they?
Well, it was a company out of, we've had one that fell through out of Chicago, and another one came in that wanted to put it in Oil City, Louisiana. The first people ran into a problem. They were going to put it in Plain Dealing, and that was on the flight path from Barksdale Air Force Base. And the FCC would not approve a 1,000-foot tower in that area.
Oh.
So they by the wayside, and then another company came in and moved it to Oil City, Louisiana, with the Shreveport license. So they changed it to down there and did that. We had several opportunities, and finally took the one on that one. Mr. Bigley did. So that's the way it goes.
Oh yeah.
And KVMA was just the station of record in that whole area right there.
Wow. I think I was reading in that article that Magnolia Reporter published that back in your junior high days, you thought about another profession, becoming a mortician.
I did.
Do you ever
Thought
wish?
about that.
Do you ever wish? I don't know. You look back at life. What if? But why didn't you become a mortician?
Well, my wife wasn't going to marry me.
Oh,
One of the things. If I was going to do more embalmed body, she wasn't going to marry me.
you know, the Lord
Now,
blesses
she did
us
let me
with
go.
the Lord blesses
She
us with
did let
good
me start to
wives.
work at a funeral home here.
Yeah.
So I was just an associate and worked funerals and go to the graveside and things like that with the flowers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do any embalming.
Oh, yeah. You must have had opportunities to go to other stations. Anybody come calling, trying to court you away?
Well, they did, but I like Magnolia.
Oh,
I
yeah.
liked the size of the town. I liked the station. I liked everything about it, all the people there. And it was just a wonderful experience.
Oh, that's
And-
great. I know folks still miss hearing Ken and hearing him on the radio. Of course, I know after I left, one of my ads kept running for years after. I never got any residuals. I don't know if you have any. I don't know if you have any ads still running or not.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think they're there anymore, but it was a wonderful, wonderful run in Magnolia, Arkansas. Like I said, Carol and I both were born and raised there, and we had our two daughters, Susan and Shannon, both there, and then Susan has Hannah and Coleman, and Shannon up here has Lily Kate, who's the youngest. She was 2 when we moved up here. She's now going into 7th grade.
Wow.
And Molly, who is a senior at Alabama, and Ella is a freshman at Arkansas.
Oh my, they grow up too fast, don't they? Yeah.
They do.
Well, I'm glad you can
They
be
do.
up there with them. We certainly miss you down here, and we could talk all day. I've tried to kind of limit it to radio. If we get talking about some of the fun we've had together, we never would get through. But we'll have to schedule a time for a follow-up interview, Ken.
Absolutely. Tell everybody in Magnolia hello, because we still love Magnolia. It's still our hometown.
Great. We'll sure do that. Thanks so much for making time for us today, Ken.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for listening to Life in LA. Feel free to contact us at steveford@gmail.com if you have a suggestion for a future topic. And as always, tell others about this podcast and share it on your favorite social media. You've been listening to Life in LA, a production of Steve Ford Photography.